Have you ever heard someone say that America was never really a Christian nation? Maybe you've wondered yourself, was faith just window dressing for politics, or was it truly woven into the fabric of the founding of our great nation? Well, this July 4th, we are going beyond just fireworks, and we are going to talk about freedom from a deeper question, and that's this. Was America actually built on Christian values? And if so, what does that mean for us today? What you'll hear over the next few minutes may surprise you because the truth is both inspiring and convicting. From presidents who prayed to founders who risked everything with God on their lips, the story of America is far more spiritual than most people realize. So grab a cup of coffee or a sparkler and a bottle rocket, whatever floats your boat, and let's talk about faith, freedom, and the soul in the founding of our great nation. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Creating the Future with me, Dr. Brent Simpson, where we are going to dive into stories and truths and deep questions that are going to shape our faith, our families, and of course, our future. In today's episode, we're going to jump into an amazing question that's going to stir both passion and probably a little bit of controversy. But the question is this: was America ever actually a Christian nation? Was it actually built on Christian principles? And as we celebrate July 4th and as we reflect and look back, as fireworks are flying and flags are waving this July 4th, I want to take you beyond the barbecues and the patriotic playlists, which, by the way, I love those. But I want to take us to the very soul of this nation's birth. And I think what we'll discover may surprise you a little bit. Now, right off the bat, America starts with some praying pilgrims and founding fathers. America wasn't perfect, but her foundation wasn't accidental. One of the most overlooked facts about our national origin is this: that America was saturated in prayer. Just think about this. On April the 30th, 1789, President George Washington is being inaugurated. I should say General George Washington is being inaugurated to become the very first president of the United States. And before he even took the oath of office, churches in New York all over the place rang their bells and called citizens to prayer in a pre-service prayer, so to speak, prior to this inauguration event. In fact, newspapers encouraged people to seek the holy protection and blessing of the Most High. Now, let me quote for you one of the advertisements in the newspaper just for your own hearing. This is what it would say. On the morning of the day on which our illustrious president will be invested with his office, the bells will ring at 9 o'clock, when the people may go out to the house of God and in solemn manner commit the new government with its important train of consequences to the holy protection and blessing of the Most High. An early hour is prudently fixed for this particular act of devotion and is, it goes on to say, wholly designated or holy for prayer. In other words, before we even get to the presidential election, newspapers all over said, hey, let's start the day with praying for this great nation, even as we embark. And when George Washington took the oath of office, do you know what he did? He placed his right hand on a Bible. That was important to him. He said the words, "So help me God." Then he bent over and kissed the Bible. All of this part was his addition, not the Constitution's. It was our founding father who thought that was important. And then, you know what the very first thing he did as president is they went from there and led a prayer service, a worship service that he was leading. That is how America began. I want you to see this. Let that sink in. Even before our first president was inaugurated, they called to prayer. In the moment, they had a Bible, hand on the Bible, kissing the Bible, "So help me God," and then going right back into a prayer meeting that the president had called. Think about that. America's first presidential act wasn't about politics, it was about prayer. And this wasn't just some kind of one-off moment. Benjamin Franklin, during the Constitutional Convention, after weeks and weeks of failed attempts and disunity among the brethren to create a constitution, he stood up and he said these powerful words. Listen to these as I quote them. He said, "I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? Now, Benjamin Franklin is often described as a deist, but he called the delegates to begin praying at the beginning of every session. And do you know what happened? Shortly after that, we started to form our Constitution. It was finalized in just a few months. And this Constitution has lasted longer than any other in world history. Now, is that coincidence or is that providence? Later on, when Benjamin Franklin was reflecting on how the Constitution came together, he said these words, and I quote, he said, "I beg I may not be understood to infer that our General Convention was divinely inspired when it formed the new federal Constitution. In other words, it was not divinely inspired the way the Bible is." And he goes on to say, "Yet I can hardly conceive of a transaction of such momentous importance to the welfare of millions now existing and to exist in the posterity of a great nation should be suffered to pass without being in some degree influenced, guided, governed by that omnipotent, omnipresent, beneficent ruler in whom all inferior spirits live and move and have their being," quoting Acts chapter 17, verse 28. So was our Christian founded with godly principles and founded as a nation that honored God? Well, let me tell you this. By 1815, just shortly after we really started to be founded and got our Constitution together, by 1815, the United States government had issued over 1,400 calls to prayer. The very fact is that Christianity was in the roots of America. Some people believe that our founding fathers were just deists who wanted to keep all religion out of the government. Well, let's think about that. And as I've already explained, our first president, George Washington, took the oath of the office and put his hand on what? The Bible. What was his first presidential act of doing? He kissed the Bible, then held a prayer meeting that some would say lasted for 2 hours within Congress. How did he determine to open sessions of Congress? Through prayer. Who would lead those prayers? Chaplains. How would those chaplains be paid? Through tax dollars. Does all of that sound like our founding fathers were trying to keep God out of the government? Just really quickly, let me give you a few more. In 1776, 11 of the 13 colonies required that one had to be a Christian in order to be eligible to run for public office. In 1777, the Continental Congress voted to spend $300,000 to purchase Bibles for distribution to the nation. That's right in the middle of the Revolutionary War when they have no money, but they're going to spend $300,000, a fortune at the time, to put out Bibles to the nation. 94% of the writings of our founding fathers contained quotes from the Bible. Every state constitution mentions God. The Ten Commandments are inscribed in marble on the Supreme Court. There is a beautiful stained glass window in the Capitol building of George Washington kneeling to pray because he was known as a man of prayer. At the top of the Washington Monument is a Latin phrase that proclaims, "Praise be unto God." So, was our founding fathers Christian? Were so many of them people of faith? And did that influence our nation? Absolutely. But let me be clear, not every one of our founding fathers was a Bible-thumping evangelical, but the vast majority shared a Christian worldview, and our system of our government was built within this worldview and with this worldview in mind. In fact, if you don't believe me, Patrick Henry famously said, "It cannot be emphasized too strongly that this great nation was founded not by religionists, but by Christians, not on religion, but on the gospel of Jesus Christ." That's what Patrick Henry said. John Adams, our second president, declared, he said it this way, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." Think about that. If morality unravels, the foundation of our government becomes unstable. That's what John Adams was saying. That's a very serious concern for us today because I think that might be what we're seeing oftentimes today. And when the truth becomes relatives, when rights are more important than responsibilities, when values that once united us begin mocking us and become abandoned, freedom begins to devour itself. And that's part of what we're seeing here in the United States. That's why Paul would write in Galatians 5:13, and he would say, "Do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love." And I think our founding fathers had that kind of mentality in mind. They weren't using their freedom to get ahead and fight everybody and get above everybody else. They were trying to use their freedom to work together to create a great nation and actually bless one another. And America worked. Look around. America is the greatest nation that has ever existed, but it's not because everybody shared the exact same religion. But so many of them shared the exact same moral compass, a belief that rights came not from the government, but from God. This is why they would famously write, "We hold these truths to be self-evident," is what the Declaration of Independence claims. But let's be honest, those truths aren't quite so self-evident any longer. The self-evidence was the fact that they came from this moral foundation of Christianity and the Bible. Now, what do the courts say? What do presidents say? And what does culture say? Well, even the courts acknowledge America's Christian roots. In fact, you may have never heard this, but in 1892, a Supreme Court decision declared our laws and our institutions must necessarily, hear that word, necessarily, be based upon and embody the teachings of the Redeemer of mankind. And they go on to say, and I quote, "This is a Christian nation." That's what our Supreme Court said. Presidents also echoed this sentiment. Many presidents did, but a few of them that you might recognize. Woodrow Wilson said, "America was born a Christian nation." Theodore Roosevelt warned, "A churchless community is a community on the rapid downgrade." Ronald Reagan famously stated, and you've probably heard this before, but he said, "If we ever forget that we are one nation under God, we will be one nation gone under." Those aren't the words of pastors. Those are the words of presidents. But let's be honest, they sound like the words of a lot of pastors. So what about the question of the separation of church and state? That might be what you're asking right now. And I think that's a great question. So let me see if I can clarify it a little bit. Okay, first of all, the phrase isn't in the Constitution or anything remotely like that. It comes from a personal letter from Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptist Association, assuring them that the federal government would not get involved in their church or try to control their church or try to mandate a national church. You have to remember, religious liberty was very important because of the Catholicism and Protestantism of Europe and the fighting that had gone on and people demanding that you should be Protestant or Catholic. That's what was going on there, and the church was concerned that American government was going to try to create a national church. And Thomas Jefferson says, no, that's not going to happen. You have to understand that Thomas Jefferson is not saying that faith should be erased from public life. In fact, you can go to Washington today, Washington, D.C., and go to the Jefferson Memorial, and you will see all kinds of writings around and quotes from him, and quite a few of them have to do with Jesus and Christianity and religion as a whole. So all that leads to the big question: was America founded as a Christian nation? Well, yes and no. If you're saying America was founded as a Christian nation in terms of you had to be a Christian to be part of this nation, or that you had to convert to Christianity once you're here, or what have you, then absolutely not. They wanted religious freedom in all that they did. But if you're looking at origin of America in values and vision and cultural ethics, it makes very clear as you study history that these American founding fathers were the vast majority Christians, and they shared this central ethic that came from the Bible, and they frequently prayed and went to church and took communion and did Christian things. But like Israel in the Old Testament, the story of America is a story of revival and rebellion, renewal and drift and revival. But maybe the real question isn't whether or not America was founded as a Christian nation. Maybe the real question is, are we still living as a Christian nation today? And it's very easy to point fingers at Congress and Senate and the White House, but the fact is, oftentimes we've already expelled God from our house. And if you want to bring revival back to our nation, it's not going to happen through the White House. It's going to happen through your house and my house, bringing God back at the center, surrendering our lives fully to God, allowing the kingdom of God to come in us and then through us. And that is actually the secret to getting us back on the right track. So this 4th of July, don't just wave a flag. I challenge you to open your Bible, gather with your family, pray for our nation, pray for our leaders. See, our freedom was purchased through the blood of our founding fathers and those soldiers, but it was also purchased through prayer and believing that God was in the middle of all that's going on. So let's not throw away those things through apathy. Hey, as always, if this episode has stirred you, listen, I would love to hear from you. Make sure you drop me a comment. I'd love to see that. Be sure to like and subscribe below. And do me a favor, if you're listening to this on a podcasting platform that allows you to rate us, do me a favor and give me a rating so that more people can be stirred by messages like you heard today. Hey, on behalf of me and Ada and our family, happy Independence Day, happy 4th of July. I pray you have an amazing day. Enjoy your time. God bless you. I look forward to seeing you next week.